She never sought attention. A quiet woman, moving through life with dignity, invisible to most, until one afternoon when a man in uniform decided to make her a target. With authority on his side and arrogance in his stride, he believed she was powerless, just another face he could dismiss. But what he didn't know was that beneath her silence lay a story that would shake his confidence and challenge an ugly truth in our society. Because who she raised was someone he never expected. She lived a life most people would call quiet, steady routines, familiar faces, and a calm presence that never demanded much attention. Her home was her sanctuary, filled with warmth and the echoes of sacrifices she had made to raise her child with love and resilience. Neighbors knew her as polite, soft-spoken, always willing to lend a helping hand. To many, she was simply the quiet mother down the street. But behind her gentle demeanor was a strength forged through years of pushing forward in a world that often tried to push her down. For her, daily life required a kind of silent endurance, walking into stores aware of the stares, being overlooked in conversations, feeling the weight of assumptions she didn't ask for. She had grown used to swallowing that sting, focusing instead on building a better future for her child. She believed that by keeping her head down and working hard, she could shield her family from the uglier truths she had long endured. But life rarely allows quiet to stay unshaken, because on one ordinary day, in a seemingly ordinary place, the fragile peace she had built was shattered. Watching eyes would turn her dignity into a target, and the choice she made in that moment would reveal not just who she was, but who she had raised. It began in the smallest way, just a glance. She was standing in line, groceries in hand, her mind on routine things, the bills waiting at home, what she would cook that evening. Yet when the officer walked in, his gaze fixed on her like a shadow searching for light. At first she dismissed it. She was used to being watched, used to the suspicion that followed her presence in spaces where some people thought she didn't belong. But this time, it wasn't just a look. It was intent. The line moved slowly, and with every step, the tension grew heavier. The officer stepped closer, inserting himself into her space, as though daring her to react. His questions came, thinly cloaked as authority but steeped in contempt. "What's in the bag? Why are you here? Where are you headed?" His tone wasn't curious, it was accusatory. Each word dripped with the unspoken assumption that she had no right to simply exist unbothered. She kept her answers measured, calm, unwilling to give him the emotional outburst he seemed to crave. But calmness didn't matter. Dignity didn't matter. To him, her restraint was weakness. And so he pushed further. He reached for her belongings, poured her drink out onto the ground, a petty act meant to humiliate, to mark her publicly as small. Shoppers nearby fell quiet, some averting their eyes, others watching with the kind of fascination that treats suffering as spectacle. Inside her chest, her heart pounded, not from fear alone, but from the fire of injustice that threatened to break free. Still, she held to silence. She knew the risks. A wrong word, a raised voice, and the story he would tell about an unruly woman resisting might be the only one the world believed. But humiliation cuts deep, especially when it is so deliberately inflicted. The officer smirked, certain of his power, unaware of the silent storm building behind her composed face. He saw only a quiet woman he could bend. What he didn't see, what he never thought to imagine, was that this woman had raised someone who would not bow so easily, because her child was not just someone's son, not just an unknown face in the crowd. He was a force the officer had yet to meet, and when their paths crossed, all the arrogance displayed in that small, cruel moment would come crashing back with a weight the officer never considered possible. The grocery floor might have mopped up spilled tea that day, but the stain left on her dignity would not be so easily wiped away. The incident was not over. It was only the beginning, because her silence was not weakness. It was preparation, and the reckoning was near. The world seemed to hold its breath in that moment. His uniform gave him license, and he wielded it like a weapon, stepping closer, voice sharp, eyes cold. The woman stood frozen, clutching the remnants of her dignity while humiliation dripped down like the liquid he had poured from her cup. For a second it felt as if the air itself had thickened, every passerby sensing the violence in his actions, though none stepped forward to intervene. She was alone under the weight of his authority. Then, without warning, he pushed further. The officer's hand lingered on her arm, not in service, not in care, but in domination. The crowd shifted. Someone pulled out a phone. Someone else whispered, "Don't move." The quiet woman, who had learned all her life to endure, stood trembling, not out of weakness, but fury contained within fragile silence. Every second was a dangerous intersection, her pride versus his ego, her restraint versus his desire to break it, and then came the voice, strong, certain, cutting through the silence like a strike of lightning. "Take your hands off my mother." Heads whipped toward the entrance. There he stood, her child, now grown, not a boy anymore, but a man etched by the same fire that kept his mother standing tall. His presence commanded attention, his reputation carried weight, and though the officer had no idea yet, this was no ordinary son. He was known, respected, a figure of authority in his own right, one who worked within the very systems this officer thought he alone controlled. The officer's smirk faltered, the arrogance draining for the first time. What had been a show of power was crumbling into a confrontation he was utterly unprepared for. The tables were turning, and the stage was set for a reckoning that no spilled drink could wash away. The officer's grip loosened as the truth settled in front of the crowd. The quiet woman, once a target of mockery, now stood shielded not by raised voices or angry hands, but by the undeniable presence of the son she had raised. The same composure she had carried through years of silent endurance was now mirrored in him, firm, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. For the officer, the humiliation he tried to force onto her had turned back on him, and there was no easy escape. The incident itself ended without more violence, phones recording, eyes watching, accountability hovering in ways it hadn't just minutes before. Yet the sting remained. Because for her, it wasn't simply about spilled tea or a public insult. It was about a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, judged before a word ever left her lips. That small moment of cruelty had been just another in a long pattern, but this time there was no erasing it. And that is what lingers. This story isn't only hers, it's the echo of countless others. Quiet women, quiet men, whole families forced to live under suspicion, forced to shrink so they won't be broken. For every humiliating glance, every needless confrontation, every routine stop that carries the weight of danger, lives are reshaped. She walked away that day with her son beside her, not unharmed but unbroken. And maybe that's the real message. Resilience doesn't erase injustice, but it confronts it, for the world to see. The question is, how many more silent battles will it take before dignity isn't something people have to defend, but something they're finally granted without question?